Your sunshade violates the height limit. I'm measuring it, whether you like it or not. That's what Ramona Culver, president of our HOA board, said as she stepped onto my porch and snapped the silver tape from her belt. The same one she always carried like it was a badge. The same one she'd already used to slam violations on 12 other homes in Glenridge Winds. But this time, her tape wasn't aimed at fabric or railing. It was wrapped around my wife's throat. "Ma'am, step back," my wife wheezed, her voice cracking. Ramona didn't blink. She tugged the tape tight behind Morel's neck with one hand and scribbled measurements with the other. "I'm documenting this for the board. You're obstructing compliance." What she didn't know was that my son Kai was watching it live, every second of it, through the emergency motion alert I'd helped him install last week. I told him the porch was rigged. I told him the camera had an override. I designed the response chain with him, and now it was catching a felony in real time. If you've ever had someone violate your wife, her breath, her space, her life, you know why I'm telling this now. And if you've ever trusted a homeowners association to play by the rules, you should subscribe right now, because they didn't. And I'm going to show you exactly how I burned the whole thing down, legally. My name is Dorian Felt. I'm a retired structural risk assessor. For 30 years, I wrote enforcement policy for buildings 10 times the size of this subdivision. I've testified in federal court. I don't rattle easy. But nothing prepared me for the look on Morel's face when Ramona's measuring tape hit skin. This house, I built half of it myself after her surgery. She couldn't handle direct sunlight anymore, not since the spinal graft, and she was too proud to ask me for help. So I painted that sunshade in the same shade of green as the scarf she wore to chemo. She smiled when I hung it. She said it made the porch feel like her again. Ramona called it a visual disruption to neighborhood harmony. She never saw the IV drip, never saw Morel clutch the porch rail when her legs went soft. All she saw was a color that didn't match her desert tone newsletter. But I saw everything through Kai's screen, shaking in my hands as his voice came through. "Dad, I'm dispatching EMS. Is Mom breathing?" Ramona still had her hand on the tape. She didn't even glance at the camera, just muttered something about non-compliant accessories. Morel's face was turning gray. I crossed the porch in 3 steps, shouldered her off my wife, and stood between them. Ramona flinched like I'd shoved her. I didn't have to. The camera caught it all. The choking, the grip, the denial. She backed away, brushing off her cardigan like she'd done nothing wrong. "The HOA will be filing a formal citation," she snapped. "Expect a notice." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because here's the part she didn't know. The feed Kai watched, it was part of a county-funded elder fall detection program I helped pilot. It's tied to mandatory incident reports. The minute her tape left a bruise, it became a state-level case. And she walked right into it. She thinks this is about a sunshade. She doesn't realize it's about every elder in this neighborhood who's been harassed, measured, shamed, and fined into silence. And thanks to her little performance on our porch, Adult Protective Services, the city inspector, and the HOA's insurance underwriter will all see what I just did. But let me go back, because you need to know how far this went before it got here. You need to see the notes she left in our mailbox, the calls she made to board members, the time she tried to trespass on my neighbor's property with a flashlight and a notebook. You need to meet the man who stayed quiet while she measured every railing on the block. Brennan Alcott, HOA Vice President, paramedic. A man who's seen too much and stayed silent too long. But first, I'll show you exactly how Glenridge Winds became a gated hell, and how we made it burn. The ambulance arrived 6 minutes after Kai hit the emergency trigger. Morel was conscious but dazed, her voice barely audible. They strapped her to the stretcher, while Ramona stood at the edge of our driveway, arms crossed, watching like she was supervising a garden being weeded. Not a word of apology, not even a flicker of guilt. Just that same frozen smile I'd seen on her campaign flyer 2 years ago, the one she'd used to win HOA president unopposed. As soon as the paramedics closed the doors, Ramona turned to me. "This doesn't change the violation. Your sunshade still needs to be removed." I didn't answer her. I watched the ambulance drive away. That should have been the end. A normal person would have backed down after something like that. But Ramona wasn't normal. She doubled down. By the next morning, our mailbox had a fresh violation notice. Same pastel cardstock. Same passive-aggressive wording. Following yesterday's on-site evaluation, your residence remains in violation of Code 4.3.12, Exterior Visual Uniformity. No mention of the assault, no reference to the ambulance, just a thin thread. Non-compliance may result in community fines, lien placement, or HOA arbitration. She didn't even sign it, just stamped it, Office of the President, and moved on. I walked to the end of the block and found 2 more pink slips stuck to neighbors' doors. One was for irregular mailbox dimensions. The other cited a petal-heavy potted plant violating native xeriscape expectations. Both homeowners were elderly. Both lived alone. She was covering her tracks, blanketing the neighborhood in citations like it would dilute what she'd done. Ramona didn't see neighbors. She saw targets. Over the next 48 hours, the pattern sharpened. Greg and Esther, the retired couple 2 doors down, got cited for their hummingbird feeder. Anita, the retired math teacher with the Parkinson's tremor, got a written warning for visual hand markings on the community bulletin board. Even our neighbor Malik, who served 2 tours overseas and walked with a limp, got a compliance email for parking 1 tire width onto the curb. It wasn't about harmony, it was about punishment. And still, no one spoke up. The board meetings weren't open anymore, not unless you requested access in writing and received approval. The official notes posted to the neighborhood app were stripped of detail. Everything was vague. Votes were conducted and passed. Motions were approved by quorum. No names, no dissent. That's how Ramona stayed in power. She bled out opposition slowly, 1 pink slip at a time. Most of Glenridge Winds didn't even realize what was happening. They saw the manicured lawns, the tidy porches, the color-matched mailboxes. They thought the peace meant everything was working. They didn't see the bruises, but I did. Morel's neck was ringed with a raw red welt, exactly the width of a metal tape measure. I took a photo. Then I took another the next morning when it had deepened into a bluish stripe. She asked me not to post it. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened the neighborhood app and checked the HOA calendar. There was a board review session scheduled that Friday. Not public, just the president, vice president, and treasurer. According to the bylaws, if 2 of them agreed on an infraction, it counted as a ruling. I knew Ramona would push for lien authority. It's what she did after any pattern of resistance. But this time, she had to get it past Brennan Alcott. And Brennan had a problem. He was the one who recommended the fall detection system we used. He helped Kai set it up last month as a favor. He knew what it was connected to. He knew it logged live motion events with timestamps. And he knew that once that log left our hands, it became part of a mandatory incident review by the county. Brennan hadn't said anything yet, but when I saw him walking past our yard that Thursday, his eyes locked on the porch rail, his shoulders stiff, I knew he was breaking inside. He kept walking, but his hand curled into a fist when he saw the sunshade was still up. The HOA was losing its grip, even if no one said it aloud yet. Ramona thought she had us boxed in. She thought fear and silence would do the rest. But she didn't know who I used to be, and she definitely didn't know what I was building next. I caught Brennan Alcott alone the next evening, just before sunset. He was standing at the community rose circle, watering cans in both hands, even though the irrigation was automatic. He hadn't looked at me all week, but I knew he'd seen everything. The breeze was sharp that day, dry with dust off the canyon ridge. It tugged at the edge of our sunshade from across the street, just enough for the color to catch the light. Brennan's eyes flicked toward it for a second, then back down. "I don't want any trouble, Dorian," he said before I even opened my mouth. His voice was low, worn out, like someone who'd practiced the same excuse too many times. "You were a paramedic for 30 years, I said. "You know what a choke mark looks like?" He didn't answer, just dumped the last of the water into the flower bed and stared at the soil like it might reply instead. "Ramona said Morel lunged at her," I continued, "that she fell. The board's official write-up is calling it an incident of reciprocal contact." His jaw tensed. His knuckles went white around the watering can handle. "You've seen the footage," I said. He gave a tight nod. No words, just that twitch of the chin. The silence between us stretched. A car passed down Ridgeview Drive, too fast, the driver not slowing for the roundabout. Brennan's gaze followed it like he was looking for an exit. "I know what she's done," he finally said. "But there are rules, Dorian. Process. If I break rank, the whole board can be dissolved. The HOA charter requires a 3-member quorum to hold vote power. She broke a person, I said. My wife. He flinched at that, visibly. A flicker of guilt, or maybe memory. Something under the surface cracked. I submitted the footage to the EMT supervisor, I said. It's part of the state's elder care monitoring program now. APS is already flagged. Insurance review is next. Brennan looked up, startled. You reported it? No, I said. The system did. I let that hang in the air for a moment, because I wanted him to understand. This wasn't personal vengeance. This was structure. This was procedure. I'm not asking you to break rank, I said. I'm asking you to decide which side of the documentation you want your name on. Brennan stared at the flowers again. One of the roses had browned at the edges, curling into itself under the weight of a week without water. He reached down and trimmed it, tossed the dead petals aside. When's the next review? He asked quietly. Tomorrow, Ramona's going to try to authorize lien authority. She'll want you and Dale to approve it quietly. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, I'll be there. And then he walked away. That was the first crack. I didn't know it yet, but Brennan was already keeping a record. Meeting logs, internal board emails, recorded phone calls. He had them all. Had been collecting them for months, small things mostly. Evidence he'd been too afraid to use. Not because he supported Ramona, but because he'd watched this neighborhood swallow too many good people. He'd seen what silence buys and what speaking up costs. He didn't want to be a martyr. He wanted to be safe, but now he'd seen enough. Later that night, I watched him from the porch as he passed by again. He didn't look up at me, but he paused just long enough to glance at the sunshade. Then he nodded once and kept walking. And I knew we had him. Not as a friend, not yet, but as a fracture line in the armor Ramona wore like law. The next morning, the violation notice was gone from our mailbox, but replaced by something worse. A folded manila envelope, unmarked on the outside. Inside, a printed notice from the HOA board. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a lien initiation form. Effective immediately, our property had been flagged for non-compliance enforcement under subsection 8.4.2 of the Glenridge Winds bylaws. It cited willful obstruction of compliance measures, aggressive behavior toward board officials, and, most absurdly, refusal to cooperate with certified inspection protocol. There was no mention of the choke mark, no mention of the footage, just bolded instructions that line enforcement would include financial penalties and possible further civil action, if not resolved within 10 business days. It was a shot across the bow. Ramona wasn't waiting for the board vote. She was forcing it into motion, confident Brennan and Dale would either sign off or stay quiet. And if they didn't, she'd pin the chaos on them too. I took the paper inside, laid it on the table next to Morel's tea, and stared at it for a long time. She was asleep on the couch, her neck still mottled, her skin pale. The nurse had left less than an hour ago. We were supposed to be focused on healing. Instead, we were preparing for financial warfare. I'd seen tactics like this before, not from HOAs, but from property developers in the city years ago, when we were inspecting low-income neighborhoods for code upgrades. They'd fine homeowners until they were squeezed into selling, then flip the land for profit. Same principle, different mask. Ramona had just tightened the noose. So, I started reading. I spent 4 hours combing through every page of the Glenridge Winds Charter, every amendment, every clause, every sub-rule she was using as a weapon. She was smart, strategic. Most of her overreach was embedded in vague language, twisted just enough to appear legitimate. But that's where she made her mistake. Because I knew code language, knew how it was supposed to read, and halfway through subsection 6.1.7, I found it. The HOA's right to issue lien threats was contingent on a minimum of 60 days of documented non-response from the homeowner to official correspondence regarding violations. That was the clause, buried deep, phrased like a formality. I opened my filing drawer and pulled out the receipt from the certified letter I'd sent 2 weeks ago, challenging the sunshade violation, the one addressed directly to Ramona Culver, signed for at the HOA office, dated, tracked, and stamped. She had received my response. 10 days later, she issued a lien threat. That made her move not just illegitimate, but legally vulnerable. Because the lien clause wasn't automatic. It required strict compliance. Ramona had short-circuited it, tried to push it through before any legal authority could intervene. And now I had proof. I scanned the certified letter into my computer and flagged it. But I didn't send it anywhere, not yet. This wasn't the kind of thing you throw at someone unprepared. Ramona would just find a new angle. What I needed was leverage. I texted Kai. Found the gap, letting it simmer. Need you to trace HOA office drop-off hours for next step. He replied in under a minute. On it. We'll check with dispatch friend too, see if her sister still works county compliance. It felt good to move again, like something other than prey. That afternoon, while I was back out front reattaching the wind straps on the sunshade, a black SUV rolled past, slow. Too slow. Windows tinted dark, no HOA logo on the side. But it lingered by our driveway, stopped briefly, then pulled off. I memorized the plate. They weren't just escalating on paper now. They wanted us rattled. But what Ramona didn't realize was that fear only works when you don't understand the rules. And I'd lived my whole life under regulations. This house, this neighborhood, this battle. It was all made of rules. She'd tried to weaponize the bylaws against us. And now I was going to use those same bylaws to bury her. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Friday, technically a review session, not open to the public. But Ramona had never closed the office blinds during one, and she didn't this time either. I watched from across the street, parked behind a trimmed hedge beside the culvert's driveway, just close enough to see her silhouette pacing inside. Dale Sims, the treasurer, arrived 2 minutes late with a laptop bag and a clipboard under his arm. Brennan was already there, leaning against the inside window frame. He wasn't looking out. Not yet. I didn't need to hear what was said. I already knew the agenda. Ramona was going to push the lien enforcement into motion, with or without full board support. She'd frame it as precedent, call it a compliance emergency, force it through. But I had something she didn't. My discovery didn't come from a basement or a garage. It came from the system, the real one. The network of interlinked state and municipal regulations that every HOA pretended didn't apply to them. That afternoon, I confirmed it with a short, pointed call to a contact of Kai's, a county compliance tech in the Office of Community Affairs. Her name was Kara, and she'd worked with Kai during a wildfire response protocol review the year prior. Kai says your mom's okay, she said when she picked up. But I also heard your HOA's making moves. I gave her the charter number and the clause, told her what Ramona had done. Then I sent over a scanned copy of the certified letter, Morel, and I had sent, complete with timestamp, signature, and USPS tracking proof. 5 minutes later, Kara called me back. Yeah, that lien threat's invalid, she said. Completely violates procedural sequence. If they file that formally, they open themselves to litigation. And if it gets tied to elder abuse context, which I'm flagging now, it becomes an insurance liability. She paused. And FYI, the HOA's current insurance provider is Municipal Coverage Trust. If this escalates, they'll likely suspend indemnity. There it was, the opening. That was the one pressure point Ramona couldn't wriggle past. Not legal pushback, not even public outcry. But money, insurance, the lifeblood of any HOA's authority. If their policy was frozen, they couldn't enforce anything. No fines, no liens, no evictions. They would become, effectively, powerless. I thanked Kara, saved the call log, and sent the short summary email to my personal inbox with attached documentation. Not for publication, not yet, but so I could prove the timeline if it came down to it. Across the street, I saw Ramona throw her hands up. Dale stepped back, visibly shaken, and Brennan finally turned toward the window. His face wasn't smug or satisfied. It was stiff, unreadable, but his eyes met mine. I nodded once. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. Brennan came out first, his phone to his ear, walking fast. Dale lingered behind, clearly trying to avoid contact. Ramona was last, striding down the walkway with a folder pressed tight against her chest. She looked up and saw me by the hedge. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she gave me the smallest smile, not friendly, not fearful, just tight-lipped and tired. Like a woman who had realized finally that control doesn't last forever. I didn't return the smile. Instead, I walked back home and printed out the county compliance documentation Kara had forwarded to me. At the bottom of the email, in bold, initiating lien process under a falsified 60-day non-response claim following a certified communication may result in HOA-wide insurance suspension pending investigation. One copy went into my binder. The second was slid under Brennan Alcott's door just after dusk. The third I kept in my glove box. Because whatever came next, we weren't just reacting anymore. We were building the response. Morel was sitting on the porch again by morning, wrapped in the soft gray blanket her sister sent from Santa Fe. The bruising around her neck had deepened overnight, dark purple now, the kind that didn't fade easily. But she insisted on being out there, said she wanted to see the light hit the sunshade, said it reminded her she was still in control of something. I didn't argue. I just pulled up a chair beside her and watched the neighborhood wake up. Brennan hadn't replied to the document I left under his door, but I knew he'd seen it. At 8:02 a.m., a short post appeared on the private HOA app feed. Reminder: per Section 6.1.7 of our charter, no lien authority may be enacted without a full 60-day documentation period. If you have received any notices to the contrary, please contact the board directly. No signature, no explanation. But it was a public correction, one Ramona couldn't undo without admitting fault. And that meant the story had shifted. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think she'd stop. Ramona didn't operate in the open anymore. That had always been her skill. She used procedures like fog, blinding enough to keep most people from seeing the shape of what she was doing until it was too late. But the fog was thinning. Around noon, while Morel rested, I checked our backyard security camera. A neighbor I didn't recognize, an older woman with short white hair and a clipboard, had walked past our side gate, paused for a moment, then kept moving. She wasn't a postal worker, no logo, no vehicle, just quiet, calculated observation. I scanned the footage again and caught it. She'd written something down after staring at the side gate. I checked the app. Sure enough, new citation posted to our property file. Possible unauthorized gate hinge replacement, inspection pending. They were fishing. Ramona was using volunteers now, unofficial inspectors, probably scared to be seen herself after what Brennan posted. So she sent others to do the probing. That was when I made the decision. I wasn't going to wait for another violation. I was going to stop them at the source. I called Kara again, county compliance, and asked a simple question. What triggers a temporary freeze on HOA enforcement? She didn't hesitate. If you can demonstrate ongoing board activity that places residents at legal or physical risk, and if your board's insurance is tied to municipal coverage trust, the county can issue a procedural audit. During that audit, all enforcement actions are paused until reviewed. And who initiates the audit? A resident petition or an incident report with attached evidence. Usually the latter works faster. I've got the evidence. I figured you did. I didn't send it in yet, but I knew what to build. That afternoon, I opened a clean folder on my desktop and titled it GW Enforcement Breach. I uploaded the certified mail receipt, the violation scan, Kara's email, and a screenshot of Brennan's public correction. Then I added the security cam still, the woman with the clipboard, time-stamped at 11:38 a.m. That alone wouldn't trigger an audit, but what would? I clicked through the HOA's own public records portal and pulled up 3 cases over the last year. All cited the same clause, 8.4.2, for fast-tracked lien threats. All were against elderly residents with medical exemptions listed in their files. I forwarded the citations to Kara. These were approved under Ramona Culver's leadership, I wrote, and none had a 60-day violation response delay. Kara's reply was short. That's enough. Submitting preliminary audit request now. I closed my laptop and stepped outside. Morel was still on the porch, watching the sunshade sway in the breeze. She looked tired but steady, like someone who'd decided not to break even when breaking seemed easier. I sat beside her again, neither of us speaking for a while. Then I said, "We've started something." She nodded slowly. "Good," she whispered, "because I'm done being measured." So was I. The knock came just after dark. 3 short taps, polite but practiced. Not the kind you'd expect from someone asking for help. More like someone ready to offer it but needing a reason. I opened the door and found Brennan Alcott standing on my porch, shoulders hunched, eyes darting past me before he stepped inside. He clutched a slim black folder like it might fall apart if he loosened his grip. "I can't carry it anymore," he said without preamble. "Not after what she did to Morel." He didn't sit, just hovered by the dining table like he couldn't quite commit to staying, like this decision still burned too close to the bone. I cleared space for the folder. He opened it and pulled out 3 things. First, a printed call log, his personal phone, marked with timestamps from board members, most of them from Ramona. Second, a printed transcript from a meeting 3 weeks prior. Brennan had recorded it on his phone. In it, Ramona spoke plainly about squeezing non-compliant households early to avoid setting public precedents. Third, a scanned copy of an internal memo she'd drafted but never distributed. It proposed a pilot policy giving the board power to initiate fines within 15 days of an unconfirmed violation if health and safety risks to visual harmony were observed. No vote, no lawyer review, just language designed to justify force. "She sent it to Dale," Brennan muttered. He thought it sounded too aggressive. She told him that was the point. I stared at the page in front of me. The phrasing was slick, crafted like marketing, all euphemism and sanitized control. But the intent couldn't have been clearer. She was preparing to bypass the system entirely. "She's afraid," I said. Brennan looked at me. "She should be," he said. "Insurance already flagged her for the footage, didn't they?" I nodded. "I didn't give them this yet," he added, tapping the folder. "But if I sign off on this packet as a board VP and you attach the violation documents you collected, they'll have to act. I've already sent the preliminary batch to Kara. The audit's moving." Brennan exhaled, like he hadn't been sure until now that someone else was pulling the weight with him. "But I need something from you," I said, his brow furrowed. "I need you to tell the board, formally, that you believe Ramona falsified the lien protocol. I need your name on that statement, not as an ouaf accusation, as a timeline, as someone who saw the receipt she ignored." Brennan hesitated, and for a moment, I saw the internal war play out across his face. He was a man who'd followed protocol his whole life. Fire, trauma, death. He'd kept everything tight, silent when necessary. But this wasn't a stranger. This was a woman choking a neighbor and using policy as a shield. "She said Morel reached for her," he said finally. "That's what she told me. She said it wasn't force, it was measurement resistance." He blinked, jaw clenched. She used those exact words. That was enough. I opened my laptop and pulled up the audit form from Municipal Coverage Trust. There was a section labeled Board Member Testimony, Attached Documents. Brennan opened his folder again and slid out a notarized declaration form, already filled in. Dated, signed. "I had it prepared yesterday," he said. "Didn't know if I'd bring it." I took it gently, hands steady. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sunshade creaked lightly on its hooks, but it didn't sway. Morel had tied it with reinforced grommets a week earlier, just in case. "You've done the right thing," I said. Brennan gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and stepped out into the night, folder tucked under his arm, eyes a little clearer. I waited until I heard his car leave before scanning the testimony and adding it to the audit folder. Now it wasn't just a complaint, it was a case. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The folder sat open on the dining table, every page laid out like a map. The scanned violations, the timestamps, the photo of Morel's bruise, the clip from the camera feed, Brennan's signed testimony centered like a keystone. I'd spent most of my career enforcing safety codes no one noticed until things went wrong. Cracked joints, bowed rafters, unseen decay, quiet failures hiding inside the walls. Ramona's HOA was the same, and now it was time to bring the inspection down on her. By morning, I had a plan. First, I updated the audit folder with a new entry, a timeline log of every HOA action taken against our property, cross-referenced with community-wide activity. I wasn't just tracking abuse, I was proving targeted enforcement patterns. Then I pulled records from the public-facing HOA financial page. Ramona hadn't noticed, but their quarterly expense report listed an external services consultant, paid 3 times in the last year. Each payment within a week of aggressive enforcement rollouts. No consultant name, no receipt. Just the note, aesthetic compliance support. I printed it, highlighted the dates, and added it to the stack. Next, I compiled images from the neighborhood, not mine, others. I'd walked Glenridge Winds every week since Morell's surgery, taking photos of structures for rehab ideas. In the process, I'd unintentionally documented a dozen properties with violations, nearly identical to ours: outdoor fabric shades, colored ceramic planters, railings 1 inch over code. Not one of them had received citations. The only difference? Their owners didn't challenge Ramona. They attended meetings, waved politely, stayed quiet. I arranged the photos in a grid and labeled them. No violation issued. Then beside them, I placed ours. Same height, same width, same materials. Violation cited, lien initiated, assault committed. Bias wasn't hard to prove when the evidence stood side by side. I didn't stop there. Using public zoning data, I matched Ramona's property to her voting record on modification approvals. She'd signed off on 5 personal exemptions over the past 2 years. Her backyard pergola, unauthorized but grandfathered. Her stone path extension, non-disruptive natural upgrade, her own porch screen, painted off tone because it matched a medical necessity she never disclosed. I took screenshots, filed them in a folder called self-exemptions. Every system has stress limits. Ramona had stretched this one until it groaned. Now I was bringing weight. By noon, the entire packet was compiled, digitized, and labeled for delivery. Not to the board, not to Ramona, to Municipal Coverage Trust, the HOA's insurance provider. Because the audit Kara initiated gave us a brief but critical window. During the review, the insurer would assess risk exposure, and if they saw what I had, they wouldn't just freeze Ramona's enforcement powers. They'd flag the board as a financial liability, and once that happened, the board's hands would be tied. I submitted the file via the portal. Attached Brennan's testimony, marked it as board internal escalation. Requested formal response under HOA Compliance Statute 13.7, an obscure clause Ramona never mentioned, but I'd used to trigger insurance investigations before. Then I sat back, watched the sun hit the porch, waited. The first reply came 3 hours later, a secure message from the insurer's legal response unit. Received. Preliminary review confirms protocol deviation. Policy review pending. Enforcement freeze effective immediately for Glenridge Winds HOA under audit status. I stared at the words for a long time. No celebration, no fist pump, just quiet air. The fight wasn't finished, not yet. But we'd locked the gate behind her. Ramona couldn't issue fines, couldn't file liens, couldn't hide behind indemnity. And for the first time since Morell gasped for breath on our porch, I felt the ground shift back beneath us. The HOA hadn't fallen, but its protection had. Ramona didn't show her face the next day. Not at her morning walk time, not at the HOA office. Her tan Lexus stayed parked in the shade beside her side gate, and the blinds in her front window were drawn for the first time in 2 years. She knew. Or at least, she'd felt the tremor beneath her feet. The audit freeze was live, her enforcement authority, locked down, and the insurer was reviewing her entire paper trail. But I wasn't finished. Freezing her wasn't the end. Not for what she did to Morell, not for the bruises or the silence or the fear she planted up and down our street. I needed to build the final sequence, the one that would leave no room for a comeback. I made a list. First, I reached out to 3 neighbors I knew had received citations in the last 6 months. Greg and Esther, the couple with the hummingbird feeder, Malik with the curb parking warning, and Anita, the retired math teacher. I asked them for their violation letters, not to make a case for them, just to cross-reference language. They agreed quietly. Each had tucked their letters into drawers like shameful secrets, never realizing others had them too. I scanned them, layered the PDFs, and found what I suspected. Ramona hadn't just reused templates. She'd copied and pasted language from old violations, some over 2 years old, without updating clause numbers. Multiple citations referenced policies that had already been struck from the bylaws in last year's amendment. That wasn't enforcement. That was fabrication. I compiled the comparisons into a single side-by-side sheet, labeled the outdated clause numbers, marked the source documents they came from. It was the equivalent of issuing speeding tickets using revoked traffic laws. I added the file to the audit case folder. Then I took a drive. I'd been avoiding the HOA office, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to act before the foundation was poured. Now it was. The enforcement freeze made it legally clear that any further action by Ramona could be deemed retaliatory or even malicious compliance. I walked in through the glass doors at 2:17 p.m., the exact time the board usually finished their private Friday sessions. The office was quiet, just the faint hum of the wall fan and the sharp tick of the front desk clock. Dale Sims sat behind the reception desk with a tablet in hand, looking like he wanted to disappear inside it. He glanced up, startled when he saw me. "Dorian," he said, clearing his throat, "we're not conducting business today, due to the audit." "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to file a board request." He blinked. "A what?" I held out the form, printed, stapled, and signed. A formal motion, filed under the HOA's own Internal Governance Clause 3.2.4, requesting a community-wide special session vote to evaluate emergency board restructuring during active audit status. It was a clause buried in the governance policy, one Ramona never thought anyone would find, but I had, and it only required a petition of 5 verified homeowners to put into motion. I'd already collected 8. Dale stared at the paper. "You want to remove Ramona?" "I want the community to decide if she deserves to stay," I said. "After what she did, and after what's coming, they should have that." "Right." He didn't argue, just accepted the paper, his hands trembling slightly as he set it in the incoming tray. Back home, Morel was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask what I'd done. She didn't need to. She just looked at me and said, "How many signed?" 8, I replied, and counting. She nodded once, then reached up and tugged gently at the corner of the sunshade, still fluttering, still standing. That night, I submitted the final update to Kara, a complete documentation timeline, violations, contradictions, petitions, and the vote request. The preparation phase was over. Next came execution. The official announcement dropped on Monday morning, a bulletin posted on the Glenridge Winds HOA portal at exactly 9 a.m. sharp. All enforcement actions are hereby paused pending audit review. A community-wide special session vote will be held Friday at 6:30 p.m. in the clubhouse to determine temporary restructuring of the HOA board. No byline, no explanation. Just the mechanical weight of bureaucracy now moving against the woman who used it like a bludgeon for years. And still, no sign of Ramona. She hadn't posted, hadn't spoken, hadn't refuted. But her silence wasn't surrender. Not yet. It was something else. The kind of stillness you see in predators when their plan changes mid-hunt. I spent that day finalizing what I would bring to the vote. Brennan had already confirmed he'd speak if necessary. I didn't want to force him into the spotlight, but his declaration was already in the file. What mattered now was making sure the community saw what we saw. I printed out 32 copies of the compiled report, summary pages only. I highlighted the key timelines, Morel's assault, the illegal lien threat, the insurance freeze, and Ramona's self-exemption pattern. I attached the quote from Kara at Municipal Coverage Trust. But the last page was personal, a single photograph, the bruise on Morel's neck, taken 2 hours after the incident, time-stamped, watermarked, and unedited. It wasn't included for drama, it was included because people forget. People forget what HOA power looks like when it crosses the line, when it stops being about rules and becomes something else. Control, ego, damage. The vote would be held in the main clubhouse, the same place Ramona had hosted her campaign meet and greet when she first ran for president. Back then, she handed out macarons and color-coded pamphlets, claimed she would beautify Glenridge and defend peaceful aesthetics. Now, her name was on the docket for removal. At 6:10 p.m., the room was already packed. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months were lining the walls, holding folders, frowning at paperwork. Greg and Esther sat near the front, holding hands. Anita was in the back, whispering with 2 other retirees. Even Malik, who rarely came to meetings, stood beside the water cooler with his arms crossed. I walked in with my binder and nodded at Brennan, who was seated near the front beside an empty chair marked HOA President. That chair stayed empty. Ramona didn't show. The session began with the HOA secretary reading the procedural language. Due to an active insurance audit and protocol breach investigation, Glenridge Winds Homeowners Association is required to hold a formal community vote on the temporary removal and restructuring of board positions implicated in violation reports. Then they opened the floor. I stood first. I didn't start with legal jargon. I didn't start with quotes. I started with the bruise, held up the photo, told them what happened to Morel, told them how she couldn't breathe, how our son, a firefighter, had watched it happen in real time through a system we'd only installed because of her previous violations, how Ramona claimed she was just measuring. I laid the facts down one by one. No dramatics, no raised voice, just sequence, documentation, truth. Then I handed out the packets. 32 sets of eyes scanned the highlighted sections. I heard the murmurs, heard the small gasps when they saw the template violations reused with outdated clause numbers, the old board minutes showing Ramona's backyard exemptions, the clause she tried to push through to fine people faster. When I finished, Brennan stood up. He said nothing for the first few seconds. Then he said, "I've served on this board 6 years. I've kept quiet when I should have spoken. That was a mistake." He looked out at them, voice steady. "I saw what happened. I signed the declaration, and I support this vote." That was all he needed to say. The secretary called for ballots. Each homeowner filled theirs in, folded it, and dropped it into the clear acrylic box. It took 20 minutes to count. 27 votes in favor of removal. 1 abstained, 2 voted no. 2 ballots were blank. Ramona Culver was officially removed from her position as HOA president of Glenridge Winds. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. I didn't sleep that night either, but it wasn't dread that kept me up this time. It was weight coming off, slow and steady, like a house settling after a storm. Ramona's removal didn't undo what she'd done. It didn't erase the violations or the bruises, or the nights we flinched at the sound of tires slowing near the curb. But it meant the board couldn't hide anymore. It meant Glenridge Winds had seen itself, ugly and bare, and voted not to turn away. Still, I knew it wasn't over, because the vote didn't erase the paper trail. And what was buried in that trail, what Brennan and I had uncovered, wasn't just misconduct. It was fraud. 2 days after the vote, I got the call I was waiting for. Kara, from the Office of Community Affairs. "Dorian," she said, voice brisk, "Municipal Coverage Trust has completed the internal review. They're not just freezing indemnity. They're moving to terminate the policy, retroactively. That's full exposure." I sat forward. "They'll notify the board officially today," she continued. "The audit flagged deliberate enforcement irregularities tied to personal gain. Your evidence packets were cited in 3 internal memos." "And Ramona?" I asked. "She's being referred for civil investigation, potential charges if the state AG follows through." I didn't speak. I just listened to the hum of her end of the line. "She tried to file a defamation claim last week," Kara added. "Didn't go anywhere. The time-stamped footage shut it down before it started." After the call ended, I walked out to the porch. The sunshade was still there, still green, still swaying in the breeze. Morel was beside me, silent. She didn't ask what the call was about. She didn't need to. 2 hours later, Brennan called. "They're holding a community debrief," he said. "Not a vote, just a meeting. Thursday night, full transparency. You need to be there." "I'll speak if they ask," I said. "No," he replied. "You need to speak either way." The meeting was held in the same clubhouse as the vote. This time, there were no ballots, just folding chairs, water pitchers, and the murmur of a neighborhood adjusting to its reflection. Brennan opened the meeting. He was acting president now, temporary until a new election could be held. "I want to start tonight by acknowledging what we didn't see," he said, "or what we chose not to see. That ends now." Then he turned it over to me. I stood with the folder in my hands, not the whole binder, just the key pages. I didn't need to convince them of anything. They'd already voted. "I'm not here to talk about Ramona," I said. "I'm here to talk about process, about how power, when left unchecked, warps ordinary places." I showed them the letter Morel and I had sent, the one Ramona ignored, the one that proved her lien threat violated the charter. I showed them the insurance letter, the audit findings, the outdated citations used on their neighbors. Then I handed the mic to Malik, then Anita, then Greg. Each one told their version, quiet, unpolished, raw. "My wife stopped going outside," Malik said. "She thought she was doing something wrong." "They made me feel like a nuisance," Anita said. I didn't hang up wind chimes because I was afraid it would be non-harmonic. I kept receipts, Greg said, holding up a manila envelope. She called our porch plant a hazard. It was a birthday gift. They didn't yell. They didn't rage. They just spoke. By the end of the night, the room had changed. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about dignity, about being able to sit on your porch without feeling judged, about saying no to the kind of control that dresses itself in paperwork. Before I left, Brennan stopped me at the door. "They're going to ask you to run," he said. "I'm not a politician." "You're something better," he replied. "You remember who this neighborhood is for." I didn't answer. I just stepped into the night and let the air move through me, clean, open, quiet. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. They took down the sign a week later. The brass plaque outside the HOA office that read, "Ramona Culver, President," came off in silence. No ceremony, no crowd. Just Brennan with a screwdriver and a plain cardboard box. He didn't even toss it. He set it gently inside, like removing a cracked tile from a floor you still cared about. The board voted to suspend all enforcement activity for 30 days while new elections were organized. No new citations, no fines, no knock-and-walk inspections. For the first time in years, Glenridge winds felt quiet, not passive, just quiet. People began walking again, not to protest, not to peak, just walking. Neighbors waved, porch lights stayed on. The bench at the Rose Circle, where Brennan used to water the same patch every morning to calm his nerves, had someone sitting on it again. And our sunshade, it never came down. After the vote, after the audit, after the insurance cancellation, Brennan filed a motion to codify new design exceptions under medical necessity. It passed unanimously. Morell's shade, the one that had almost cost her breath, was now part of the HOA's official policy archive as a protected accommodation. They called it the Felt Clause. I didn't ask for it, but it meant something. Not just to me, to every person who sat in silence while tape measures decided their value. Ramona never returned. Her property was sold in escrow. Rumors said she moved out of state, somewhere without community bylaws. The civil investigation is ongoing. I haven't heard if charges will stick. I'm not waiting for justice from courtrooms. We found it on the porch, in the vote, in the voice Brennan finally raised. I did end up running, just for a board seat, not president. I didn't want the gavel. I wanted the bylaws. I wanted to be the line they couldn't cross, the one that didn't bend because someone thought a flower pot looked out of place. Last Thursday, I sat in on a new member orientation meeting. 3 new residents, each with folders in their laps. One asked if hanging string lights in December was permitted. Another asked about visible trash bins. And the third one, quiet, older, asked, "Do we have a say in how the rules are enforced?" I told her yes, because now we do. Morell's bruise has faded, but the imprint of that day hasn't. It changed how we sit outside, how we look at the street, not with fear anymore, but with clarity. Control, once broken, leaves cracks behind. But sunlight gets through cracks, and sunlight is how you start over. If you've been through something like this, if you've ever been silenced or punished by people hiding behind procedures, know this: you are not alone. You are not powerless. You just haven't been loud enough yet. And when you are, they won't know what to do with you. Thank you for walking through this with us. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in truth louder than titles, in neighbors over control, subscribe now. Because the next one starts with a doorbell. And this time, we'll be ready.